This is the Lean Builders Hoots on the Ground podcast with absolutely, positively no bullshito. Join us as we dig into exactly what lean construction is and how we can use these concepts and strategies in the field. This podcast will be different as we journey to job sites and mine the minds of lean builders, all in effort to pass forward building knowledge from those who have put their time in to learn a better way. Because that's just what lean builders do.
What's up, y'all? Adam Hoots here, the Lean Builder Podcast, R&D with Hoots and Harry. No key today, but that's okay. Goes without explanation. We've R&D'd so much, but maybe Harry, can you run us through just quickly, because I think folks are starting to know you better than me. Who are you? What's this R&D thing? And then what's on your mind, man?
Sure. Thanks again for having me, Adam. It's always an honor and a privilege to be here and spend some time with you. For those that may not know me, my name's Harry Schmidt. I'm the Director of Business Strategy for O'Shea Builders. We're a medium-sized construction management firm in Central Illinois, and we do some self-perform work as well. So we're in the trades space as well. And from the R&D side of things, I've been in a number of different industries. I was in the military. I flew some airplanes there. I was in logistics in the military, and then I went into IT, and then I was in healthcare, design and construction, and then I ended up on the administrative side in healthcare as well. And it was just a concept I picked up along the way that there's a lot of really great ideas out there. And R&D is typically research and development. You think about all the dollars and the investments you make. And it was like this really easy concept for Harry that I'm like, man, there's a really great idea. Why don't I just rip off that idea and deploy it into my organization? I don't have the time and energy and effort to go do all this research, but I can certainly rip that off. So it's rip off and deploy is the R&D model for what I do. So take somebody else's great idea and apply it to my situation, and generally somebody else helps make you successful. So that's kind of the idea of the Lean Builder as well. We help each other be successful. So feel free to R&D any of this stuff, all that you want to.
Yep, just make sure you give it back to us better than you took it, right?
Exactly.
Well, what's on your mind today?
Adam, I've been reading this book, and I think I'm going through it for the second time because there's a lot of really intricate details and information in here. It's called The 5,000 Year Leap. And the subtitle is A Miracle That Changed the World. And they're the Principles of Freedom 101. And it's by an author, W. Cleon Skousen. And it is a book that outlines the communication and the letters that were exchanged between the framers as they were building the Constitution for the United States. It's a really deep book in thinking about the timing of when this happened, of how do you build a country? Holy cow, it's a heavy read, but I highly recommend it. It's really cool. And one of the ideas inside of this book is that where does social responsibility fall on the spectrum? Okay, in the idea of the framers, as they were building the Constitution, their idea was that the family should take care of the individual. And if the family couldn't do it, then the church should take care of the family. And then if the church couldn't take care of it, then the community should try to chip in and take care of it. And if the community couldn't do it, then the state would chip in. And then eventually the federal government would chip in. So it was really this idea that it was built on small government, right? Not this big intervention. When you think about what was there was no such thing as the federal government back then. This idea of this whole big controlling organization was non-existent, but they did have these the church communities. So you had the family structure, the church community, and then they had what were the states at the time. So they really didn't have this big idea of how they built this thing. So that idea of how does personal responsibility manifest itself in accountability and reliability? Who's responsible, right, for themselves? People are. And then how do you help people out in this chain of events? So I don't know if that stimulates any thoughts in your head or what you've seen something like that in the past.
100%. You actually have me thinking, and let me see if I can pull it up here. It's the socio-ecological model. Are you familiar with that concept?
You're going to have to tell me more.
Let me show you in lieu of telling you, or maybe show you and tell you here. So, what I just heard you describe is exactly this model. And this is a model that was put together by the CDC, I believe, in order to prevent disease
Hmm.
spread, to control diseases. When you look here, you've got this individual level, which you talked about, right? Relating to that family from a social responsibility perspective. And then that goes into the interpersonal side, which again, you mentioned maybe the church, right? So these are people
Right.
that you count on, that you can influence, friends, families, the people you hang out with the most. And then to the organization, which you claimed as the community. And then you bring that up into what they call in the model a community, but that's really that state level that I think I'm hearing from you. So this may be city to state. And then you've got that national or public policy rules and procedures. And what's interesting about this model, and when I hear you, you're saying that it was used for social responsibility. This is actually used for control of disease spread, which super relevant right now with everything that's happening.
Wait,
Uh,
you mean that's my responsibility as an individual to take care of myself? Oh
yeah,
wait, I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'll get off my soapbox.
yeah. It's your responsibility not to spread it to the church and not to
Right.
spread it to the city and the state, and then all of a sudden we've got a national emergency. But yeah, I love, and I sense the joking in your voice there. But what's really interesting to me and bouncing around in my head, and maybe you can help me solidify the thought, is when I'm teaching teams capability development, forever telling them that there's these different stages or these different levels of detail on how we really dive in. We can study capabilities at the individual level. And then when we start to combine capabilities of our close friends or our close network, those people who we hang out with the most, right now we're starting to develop a different kind of capability. The ways that we develop that capability might be the same, but we're having to develop that with other people. And I think the complexities, as well, for one, just where are people's current capabilities, right? So you've got, when you look at this, you've got an individual capability, and then maybe you're bringing folks together. So again, we're boots on the ground. That's our focus. So we've got teams, and that's when I'm bringing a bunch of different trade partners together, or maybe even my internal team, and I'm trying to organize who's going to do which scope. And then I'm getting to the organizational level where, okay, that's the whole team and that's the architect and the trade partners and that sort of thing. And then I start to get to the community, and that's really that construction community. So now I'm thinking bigger than just my team, but I'm thinking my entire organization. And then when I get to public policy, maybe that's the whole industry together. And so it challenged us as an industry to really dive in and say, how are we developing individual capabilities? How are we developing internal team capabilities? How are we developing capabilities that center around the entire team, architect, engineers, builders, all included? Then from an organization, how are we doing? And then you can broaden that even further as to an industry. How are we doing? What are those public policies and procedures that should be on an industry wide basis? And when we can really think about this model of how to develop capabilities at each one of these levels, we're going to start to understand how we're putting teams together and how teams can be most successful when we create the right environments for them to thrive. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I'm kind of going on a soapbox here and this dream world thing that I'm connecting with this 5,000-year leap, which is a hell of a jump, by the way. Where are you at?
No, I love where you went with it, thinking about this public policy idea, and then how does that apply to how we're developing our competencies. And I listened to one of your other podcasts, and I believe you were talking about the shift from a directive leadership style, or I think you called it a dictator, the dictatorship, the superintendent that's a dictator. I use the term a facilitative leadership style. And we have a program here locally at O'Shea, and we call it Superintendent 2.0, right? Because we're trying to reinvent the superintendent and trying to blow up that model of saying, hey, that directive leadership style, referring to a podcast that you and I did in the past here, right? If you want to keep doing the process that you're doing, you're going to keep getting the outcome that the process was designed to achieve. So that directive model was getting us what? It was getting us late projects, over budget, and really cruddy morale, a really cruddy culture on the job. So how do we re-swizzle that? So we decided that we needed to change the training for our superintendents, 2.0, reboot it at the individual level. And now you start to say, oh, if I create that change in the individual, now the team is going to react differently, right? That interpersonal piece, or the team now is going to have a different dynamic. I've got the privilege of coaching a number of teams, and as we get our superintendents moving along this facilitative leadership model, it's amazing how many of the trade partners say, when we do a plus delta, they'll make comments, these jobs are different. We don't fight with each other. We don't yell at each other. We talk about our problems and solve them together. But you have to start, you're talking about, the change has to start inside. It has to change at the individual. I can't come from the top down, and the public policy is be nice to everybody. I can't do that. So we've really started to see the ripple from the inside out and how it's changing those teams. Now we're starting to try to influence our design partners, right, the architects and engineers, and saying, hey, there's a different expectation for behaviors on how we interact together and what we're going to do and how we're going to relate to each other as peers in this model as well. So I don't know, I think that's starting to resonate with me and how we're going about
This quote just came to mind, and it's by Mother Teresa, and it says, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And
Yeah.
so the point being, like, if you want to change the outcomes that you're getting, you got to start internally with yourself as an
Right.
individual before you look at those closest to you, or before you look at your trade partner team, or before you just say, oh, it's the architect's fault, or it's just the industry. That's just the industry we're in. Or
Right.
I think that you just brought home a huge point of, look, we've got to start with ourselves. And even going back to the CDC disease control, if we want to prevent this COVID-19 thing, if you're sick, stay at home, follow the guidelines, right? Because if you're not, then your closest friends are going to get it. And then before you know, or your church is going to get it. Then before you know it, your city's going to have it. Then your state's going to have it. And then it's a national emergency. And so if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. Start in your own house and get your own house in order
Right.
before you start helping your neighbor with their family or their house or their problems. And I think that's something that it's easier to say that than it is to do it, because we always are able to see flaws in other people first before we recognize our own flaw. And by no means am I preaching, because I fall victim to that on a daily basis. It's just human nature to criticize others before you look internally. But that's again a concept I picked up in the leadership and self-deception, which I love these episodes because we're always mining different topics that we can have for future ones. And so maybe that's another R&D episode. But man, you got my wheels turning. If you want to change the world, start with your own house.
Yep. And what's funny is, by making that change there, that culture, that culture of respect, and it's like that ripple. You drop that pebble in the lake, and that ripple starts to take effect. And like I mentioned, we've got trade partners now, they'll prioritize our jobs. And they're like, I'm going to come. If you need us to come and be here on Tuesday, we'll be here on Tuesday for you. And there's other ones that are like, no, they're just going to wait because they don't respect me. I show up and the job's not ready for us. They're like, I'll get to them when I get to them. But you guys treat me differently. I'm going to show up and I'll be here for you. You attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. I think that's an old grandma. That's an old grandma saying. I don't know, not a Mother Teresa, but
yeah. And I heard you mention the ripples, and to R&D Miss Jen Lacey, right? It's all about those ripples of impact. You might make an impact or make a saying here, and then you don't even realize some of the people that learn that. And will, even us, when we're doing these R&D segments, who knows who's going to take this information and do something amazing and potentially change the world with it.
yeah. And isn't there another book called Moments of Influence? I can't remember who it's by.
I haven't read that. I'm going to have to put that on our list here.
I'll look it up and get it to you. I did send you a link to the 5,000 Year Leap if you want to put it in your show notes there. Yeah, like I said, it's a deep read, but it's, man, talk about really understanding what the intent was. And you go back to you hear people complain and point fingers and do everything else. You're like, hey, let's go back to the original documents and really see what the idea was in general before we start critiquing.
Internal first always. That's because that's just what lean builders do. We give away all the credit and we take all the blame. It's internal first always. It's what's right over who's right, and that's super important.
And like I said, I love the idea too of saying, hey, I got to build my competency, and I need to change. If I'm going to change the job, it's got to start with me, and then show up. And we use that hungry, humble, smart model and try to apply that as well. Hungry to learn more, humble enough to apply it and make a change, and smart enough to not smart enough to know what you're doing, but not so smart that you have to tell everybody about it.
No, you're still humble with it. And that actually comes from Patrick Lencioni's ideal team player. So
Right.
maybe that's another R&D. We could R&D from Patrick Lencioni all day, every day.
Oh my gosh, I love, first of all, they're very easy reads. I can read them. I wish I had more pictures. But those aren't too deep, but I can get great lessons out of those things as well.
No doubt. I think the lesson of this one is always start internally. Look and challenge yourself. Even when you're holding somebody accountable, it starts internally. Challenge your own process before you look at the person in the process, because I'd even say 8, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be something that you're not doing. You're not communicating. Like, people want to thrive and people want to do good. It's just natural tendencies for human nature. We all want to contribute. We all want to matter to R&D, another phrase from Miss Jen Lacey. People just want to matter. And so when we help them matter, like you said, we get prioritized. I had contractors on my job. Oh, Hoots is running the job. You better believe we're going to give you a competitive number. Because we know we're going to be on schedule. We know he's going to hold us accountable. We also know he's going to hold everybody accountable to the same standard. That's very important in what we do. And that standard is a measurement of myself. And internally, again, what do they say? The culture is defined by the worst behavior a leader is willing to accept. Again, that tells you that leader's looking internal before they look external. They're going to set the tone. They're going to set the bar. They're going to set the precedent for everybody else to follow down the line.
Yeah, there's another good book is to R&D from, it's called You Teach What You Accept.
I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a short read, but you think about the idea, right? If somebody behaves poorly and then you let it go, everybody else goes, I guess that's okay. You just taught that. We had a situation, and I'm not going to talk about it specifically, but it was like, we need to circle back with that individual and let them know that is not acceptable, because it happened in front of a number of people. It was like, if we don't nip that in the bud, that's just going to fester and it's going to propagate, because everybody else is going to think that's okay.
Yep. Yeah, we're setting standards, and people are watching, and people understand what they can and cannot get away with.
Yeah. So it's funny though, as a leader, it's not always what you do. Sometimes it's what you do not do. If you think about it, when you've got a meeting and somebody's being disruptive, and you elevate your tone, you elevate you to talk over them if they're in the back of the room and they're doing something, versus saying, it's interesting is if you just stop, you don't have to interrupt them, and you just stop the meeting and wait, and it gets really quiet, and all of a sudden they realize that they're the ones that are talking, and then they'll turn and look at you and you're like, okay, thanks, let's get back on point. Everybody else in the room, and they know it too, they're like, I shouldn't have been doing that. You know what I mean? It's a subtle way to handle it versus the, hey, stop it. Yeah. When you go off the rails, then you're like, oh, okay, now I got 2 bad things that just happened.
When it happens over and over again, sometimes you just got to take your hat off and give them hell. No, I'm kidding. Sometimes.
I know.
But anyway, so anything else you want to tack on to this topic? Again, I love, because we keep discovering future R&D episodes. So anything to round this one off here?
No, the ultimate, it's interesting how these ideas, these models can be applied. We took that one model and applied it in 3 different situations, and it's effective both ways, or in all 3 of those. So that's a neat idea. When you simplify things and you think about, you and I have been talking about systems thinking, and okay, how does the system react and respond, and how does that work? Look forward to learning more from you and on that here in the future.
Likewise, we're always learning together. That's one of my favorite parts about hanging out with you.
Likewise.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time, and looking forward to the next time we get you on here.
Yeah, great stuff, Adam. Thanks again.